And now we cross over to our Oseong for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. As we wrap up the biggest issues of the year in the final week of 2021, today we focus on the geopolitical developments surrounding the Korean Peninsula. And today we have the honour of speaking with Susan A. Thornton, a scholar and retired US diplomat. With almost 30 years of experience in the Foreign Service, Susan A. Thornton was an acting Assistant Secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs at the Department of State in the United States, and she led East Asia policymaking for the US government. She's currently a Senior Fellow at the Paul Tsai China Center at Yale University Law School. She's also the Director of the Asia Pacific Security Forum at the National Committee on American Foreign Policy and a non-resident Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. Very warm welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Good to see you, Soo-Young.
Thank you. And well, this month happens to mark the 10th year that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un rose to power after his father died in 2011. And when the younger Kim, when he first took power in December of 2011, many hoped that he'd take North Korea in a new direction. And in fact, the Obama administration tried to engage with the regime and sent an envoy, Mr. Glenn Davis, for engagement. But despite having agreed on the Leap Day deal, Kim Jong-un decided to launch a satellite in violation of UN resolutions. And after that, it was history. There were more missile tests, 4 nuclear tests launched over the last 10 years. Well, what did you make of the last 10 years of Kim Jong-un? And do you think he was genuine about wanting to denuclearize during his summit with former President Trump?
Yeah, well, I mean, these are really good questions about getting inside the mind of Kim Jong-un, what he really thinks. There's a great debate, of course, among experts on the Korean Peninsula about whether or not Kim Jong-un really intends to denuclearize or not. I think, I cannot get inside the mind of Kim Jong-un, but I think probably it was over-optimistic to think that a new leader in North Korea would so quickly go in a new direction. And I think anytime you have a new leader coming in, there's a lot of testing that's going on. Of course, a new leader has to prove their mettle most, prominently inside North Korea itself. So he has to take care of domestic constituencies, et cetera. And I think that's what we were seeing in the first, several years of Kim Jong-un's leadership is, he wanted to try to do something maybe different, show that he could lead the country. But I think we saw that he was forced to sort of reckon with internal problems and had to do a lot of testing of the international community. So we saw the missile launch, the space launch, that threw the Leap Day deal into, set it back. And I think we've, sort of been figuring out how to make next steps ever since, really.
Well, maybe the new US administration lacks the sort of flair that former President Trump had in his tweets. But despite the Biden administration's invitation to talk anywhere, anytime with the North Korean regime, Pyongyang hasn't taken up the offer. And, well, why do you think this is?
Yeah, well, the Biden administration's been in now for almost a year. Of course, that year has coincided with a lot of other challenges. And first and foremost, I think we have to acknowledge that COVID-19 has probably been the main driver behind the sort of stalemate in the North Korean diplomacy that we've seen over the last actually couple of years, because the North Koreans have basically, locked themselves down and have not come out. I mean, we saw photos of Kim Jong-un today at the plenary session of the Central Committee, but he's really not been much in evidence during the pandemic at all. He looks a lot thinner than he did the last time we saw him. So who knows what's been going on inside North Korea, but it's certainly the case that the borders have been sealed off even to trade, and we haven't heard anything from North Korean officials. Now, there may be other things going on that we don't know about, but it's pretty clear that the North Korean leaders are not going to come out for international engagement until they're fairly confident in being able to fend off the effects of the pandemic, at least.
And well, many have been hoping that China would sort of push its neighbour in the right direction. And well, as the competition between the United States and China intensifies in many strategic areas, well, there was hope that maybe North Korea could be an area of cooperation. But it seems that Beijing doesn't really see it that way. It's been continuing to call for the wavering of sanctions at the United Nations Security Council. It's been encouraging engagement there at the same time. How has the lack of compliance to global sanctions by countries like China and the different perspectives from Beijing and Washington really affected the progress of dealing with the North Korean regime?
Yeah, I think there's a difference in emphasis always between the United States and China when dealing with North Korea. China's always focused on maintaining stability and providing a lifeline, if you will, to the North Korean people. And that's been sort of a constant priority for them all through the times when we've worked together with China on this issue and when we haven't. So I think you see that coming through. Now, there was a time during the Trump administration where we were very much, I think, in lockstep on the not only passing of new, very stringent sanctions resolutions, but also stepping up enforcement. After the failed Hanoi summit, I think the Chinese probably figured that we were in a period now of extended non-diplomacy, as there hasn't really been anything happening since then. But I think with the lockdown from COVID, what we see there is that the North Korean regime is probably not that sort of affected by the sanctions regime in any case. So even the Chinese trade has been stopped. So things, smuggling is continuing to happen over the border. But I think to sort of say that the sanctions enforcement is the leading cause of why we haven't made progress on this issue for the last couple of years would be probably an exaggeration.
Well, the Chinese have been pushing for the resumption of the six-party talks. They enjoyed the four-party talks, but of course these multilateral dialogue opportunities, they fell apart after North Korea walked out and they continue to violate UN resolutions. And well, it's also quite clear that, as you said, Beijing cares more about regime stability than denuclearization or human rights in North Korea. Then what really is the significance of getting the Chinese involved in multilateral talks? And in your opinion, what should multilateral cooperation look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a person who thinks that we should do whatever works. So I'm not that caught up in what the shape of the table should be or who should be at the table or for how long, et cetera. I think, it's pretty clear that one thing the North Koreans are expert at is dividing and conquering among all of the various parties that are involved in this issue. And I think that's where we talk about multilateral efforts, because we should have everyone on the same page trying to get to the non-proliferation goal that the international community has set vis-a-vis North Korea, and not let the North Koreans divide the other parties. And the other thing I'll just say here is that this is a very hard problem. We've been working on it for 30 years. We've made not very much progress, obviously. And so you're going to need, in order to get progress on this issue, you're going to need all of the leverage, all of the carrots, and all of the sticks that everybody else in the international community has to bring to bear. And we're going to have to figure out how to assemble all of those things together on the same side. And so far, we've also not done a great job of being able to do that. I think the U.S.-China tensions are going to make that more difficult in the future. So I think that's part of the reason why it's difficult to see this as an area of cooperation at the moment. But the North Koreans are the main stumbling block right now.
Well, in terms of carrots and sticks, your exchange of letters with Li Nan, the senior fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, it received a great amount of attention. And in your exchange of letters, you said that if Kim Jong-un's ultimate concern is regime security or survival, then economic incentives just aren't going to work. Then what do you think the approach should be?
Yeah, well, if his main concern is over regime security, then we're going to have to offer him something that can satisfy him on that count. And if I don't think economic sanctions on the country. I mean, it's sort of been proven now. We've tried this for 30 years with ever increasing and stringent sanctions regimes. And they imposed the most stringent sanction regime on themselves now for the last 2 years under COVID. I think we've shown that that isn't where the regime's security key is. So it's going to have to be something that Kim Jong-un lets us know he wants, that would give him security that could replace what he feels he gets from having the nuclear weapons program. And so far, I don't think that we've been able to get far enough along in our discussions to understand exactly what that would be, but it would have to be something related to security guarantees and other kinds of peace incentives and other kinds of incentives in the security space.
Well, of course, North Korea is one of the biggest security threats here in East Asia, and the US has been trying to get its allies together to really cooperate, South Korea and Japan. But of course, our politicians haven't been very cooperative on that front in Seoul and Tokyo. And well, relations between our two countries, South Korea and Japan, they spiraled into a trade war back in 2019, and things really haven't improved since then. And well, recently, South Korea has shown some willingness to improve its relations with Tokyo, but it seems that the sentiment isn't being shared by Japanese officials right now. Well, how vital is the cooperation between Seoul and Tokyo, and what do you think could be the first step to restoring their ties?
Well, this is a very tricky problem, and it's unfortunate that we've seen things kind of spiral in the wrong direction in the recent period. Certainly the U.S. administration, the Biden administration, and Secretary of State Tony Blinken has been very involved in trying to facilitate more communication, more cooperation between Seoul and Tokyo. And we certainly have an interest, given that these are our two closest allies in East Asia, in seeing more cooperation happen. But I think, it's very difficult for the U.S. to carry the water that needs to be carried in order to sort of smooth things over. I do think there is a lot of cooperation that goes on sort of practical day-to-day issues among the two in the context of the alliance with the United States. But there's just going to be that sort of fundamental reticence and mistrust there, which I think the U.S. feels is an inhibitor. I'm not really sure, how we get over this. A lot of people feel that there's a lot of domestic politics in both capitals wrapped up in some of these issues, and that, maybe a shakeup in domestic politics would help things. Other people say we need to just shelve these history issues and get on with day-to-day practical issues until, they can be broached at some time when it's less fraught. So I think we'll just have to see. But in the meantime, I do think that cooperation is continuing to be possible, and there are a lot of consultations going on the North Korean issues.
And the US has also been hoping for its allies to also stand together against, in terms of countering China too, of course. And here in South Korea, a survey by Asan Policy Institute, it shows that most South Koreans think negatively about China and still see the US as their greatest ally. However, the current administration has been generally wary of angering Beijing, and it's preferred not to get deeply involved in Quad or Quad Plus initiatives in the Indo-Pacific. What do you make of this stance? Do you think Korea can keep hedging, and also what kinds of opportunities for collaboration with initiatives like Quad Plus do you see for South Korea?
Well, there's a lot of issues packed into that question, but let me see if I can unpack some of them. So I do think that the basic question that you ask is about sort of middle power stance in this kind of great power competition between the U.S. and China. And it's not just Korea that feels awkward about this competition. There are a lot of countries, particularly in East Asia, but around the world, that feel sort of caught in the middle, and particularly if they're, kind of smaller powers that are reliant on trade and far-flung supply chains, et cetera, as Korea is in East Asia. It creates a kind of a difficult set of interests that you have to navigate among and have to protect, right? So every country has a different set of interests that it's protecting and has a different threat perception about the China threat, and what kinds of other things it has to kind of apportion its resources for and take care of. And so I think that explains basically, what the government in Korea is trying to do. It's not an easy thing to do. I think there's Every time I meet with a Korean official, they talk about this old Korean adage about being the shrimp among whales. And I think this is the perfect example of that, right? But, I do think that Korea does have a lot that it can contribute to various efforts through the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, the Korean New Southern policy, and whether or not it has to join Quad initiatives. I don't advocate joining things just to join things or creating groupings just to create groupings. If there's a reason for Korea to participate, for example, in an effort on technology and communication standards setting or other kinds of initiatives where Korea has a comparative advantage, I think for sure Korea should get involved in those. But just to join I don't think the Quad is actually, from what I hear from my friends in the administration, necessarily open for new members at the moment. They're still trying to consolidate the gains that they're trying to make among the four. But I think Korea shouldn't feel that it needs to join just to join. It's got a lot more to bring to the table than that.
Well, and of course, the Quad, the name itself, kind of gives constraints as to how many members can be there. But, well, just briefly before we let you go, there's been a lot of questions, a lot of curiosity around whether the Biden administration is going to join the CPTPP. But, it hasn't so far. Do you think, is it going to be pursuing its own economic partnerships in the region?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's one that all of the people like me in Washington are asking our friends in the administration. What is the economic agenda for the Indo-Pacific strategy? Because it's been a little bit late in coming. And I think, CPTPP is going to be a very hard one for the Biden administration as the tide has turned really against trade on both in the Democratic and the Republican parties in the United States. There is talk of a new kind of Indo-Pacific economic framework. We haven't really heard a lot of details about what that's going to include. I don't think we'll see more kind of free trade agreements being negotiated by the Biden administration. It seems to me that they're more focused on kind of standard setting, supply chain initiatives, and other kinds of new technology initiatives for their economic framework. But we haven't really seen the details yet, so we'll have to wait and see. But I don't think CPTPP is in the cards. I think we're all waiting to see if Korea is going to apply to join CPTPP.
Well, thank you very much for making time for us today, and we wish you a very happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Thanks.